familiar faces, love this. My name is Lenora Henson, for those of you who don't know me, and I'm the curator and director of public programming here at Theodore Roosevelt's inaugural site. On behalf of our board of trustees and our staff, I'd like to welcome all of you to Speaker Night. I'd especially like to welcome Dr. Mark Rice, who is our guest speaker this evening. Speaker Night is our opportunity on the fourth Tuesday of most months to invite experts to come in and help us think about some of the issues that were important during TR's presidency and continue to be relevant today. The TR Site Speaker Night series is made possible with the generous support of M&T Bank as well as the New York State Council on the Arts, NYSCA. Our sincere thanks to both of those groups. I should mention that NYSCA's support has also enabled us to record all of our speakers, not only this year but last year as well. So if you've missed any of them, I hope you'll check out the recordings on our YouTube channel. As I already mentioned, we are joined this evening by Dr. Mark Rice, a professor at St. John Fisher College in Rochester. Dr. Rice earned his PhD from the University of Hawaii at Manoa and also holds an MA from Bowling Green State University as well as a BA from the University of Washington. Dr. Rice specializes in the history of photography, 20th century American culture, and transnational American studies. At St. John Fisher, he led the creation of and has chaired the Department of American Studies. He has twice been awarded the Trustees Award for Distinguished Scholarly Achievement at St. John Fisher, most recently in 2017. He's been a contributor to Forbes magazine, Newsweek International, Huffington Post, and serves as a panelist on the TV Ontario current affairs program, The Agenda. His main research area is the public role of photography in American society. His first book, Through the Lens of the City, NEA Photography Surveys of the 1970s, was published in 2005. His second book, which is the subject of his talk this evening, was published in 2014 and is titled Dean Worcester's Fantasy Islands, Photography, Film, and the Colonial Philippines. It has received wide acclaim and was the recipient of the Gintong Accolade Golden Book Award in the Philippines in Social Sciences in 2016. He was also a finalist for the Philippine Book Award in History. Having said that, I'm delighted to turn the podium over to Dr. Mark Rice. Please join me in welcoming him.
Thanks, Lenora, and thanks, Lindsay, for communication and help in getting things set up here. And thanks to all of you for coming tonight to hear my talk. Before I get started, the project that this comes out of is based on intensive primary research in archives, local deep digs into archives. That's the kind of work I like to do. And Lindsay and I were just having a conversation about her own research that she's done about needing to go back to the starting point. Sometimes historians say things about moments in time, or photographs, or whatever they are, and those interpretations might not necessarily be the right interpretation, I guess. So this book, that was kind of an unexpected development in my own scholarship, emerged out of a single particular photograph that I had seen, that a few historians had written about, and that I was convinced had been misinterpreted. And so I wanted to get back to the beginning point of that photograph, and then it spiraled out into something that I lost control of and had to be shaped into this book. Unfortunately, that particular photograph isn't part of the talk tonight, but I do have a copy of my book here. If anybody's interested, I can share that with you at that point. I have a choice of being able to see you or see the writing here, and I'm going to choose the writing for the most part, so I apologize if okay. All right. Although he isn't usually mentioned in published histories of National Geographic magazine, Dean Conant Worcester was anything but a martial figure in that magazine's emergence as a major publication in the early 20th century. And this is the man here. In fact, Worcester was at the very center of the entwined histories of National Geographic and American colonialism at that time period. That the magazine's success was linked to U.S. control of the Philippines has been well documented by historians. Until the publication of my book in 2014, however, Worcester's centrality in that relationship had been overlooked. What I want to talk about this evening is what I consider to be his instrumental role in helping the magazine develop into the publishing powerhouse that it was for much of the 20th century. Before doing so, however, I'd like to give you a brief overview of who Worcester was. Born in Vermont in 1866, He was educated at the University of Michigan. In 1887 and 1888, while still an undergraduate, he was a member of the Steer Zoological Expedition to the Philippines, an expedition concerned primarily with collecting and identifying bird species. After graduating with a degree in zoology, he returned to the Philippines as part of the Menage Zoological Expedition, which lasted from 1890 to 1893. This is Worcester here. This is his companion, a man by the name of Frank Burns, who took all the photographs during this expedition. And this is one of the trackers when they were on the island of Mindoro, helping them hunt water buffalo. With the publication of his book, The Philippine Islands and Their People, shortly after the end of the Spanish-American War in 1898, Worcester gained recognition as perhaps the country's leading expert on the Philippines. In 1899, President McKinley appointed Worcester to the first Philippine Commission. I don't know how well you can see that. At least I get the overhead lights. Can you see it okay? Okay. So this is Worcester here in this photograph. The first Philippine Commission, which was tasked with making recommendations about how the U.S. ought to proceed in the Philippines following the Treaty of Paris that brought an official end to the Spanish-American War. In 1900, he was appointed to the Second Philippine Commission, the only holdover from the First Commission. This is here. That commission, also known as the Taft Commission, was the sole legislative authority in the Philippines for more than a decade. Worcester served on the Taft Commission longer than anybody else, stepping down in 1913. For 13 years, he was Secretary of the Interior of the Philippines, and he had broad authority to shape policies that pertained to the non-Christian minority groups in the Philippines. He also oversaw the development of a number of agencies, including the Bureau of Agriculture, Bureau of Science, and Bureau of Health. After stepping down as a colonial administrator, he returned to the United States for about a year, then returned to the Philippines, where he lived the remainder of his life. He died of heart disease in Manila, the capital of the Philippines, in 1924. I find it surprising that Worcester has been so overlooked in the history of National Geographic, especially when you consider that he contributed 5 lengthy articles to the magazine between 1898 and 1913, and that his photographs appeared in many other articles written by other people. In fact, Worcester's photographs helped create and popularize the magazine's ethnographic aesthetic, and his photographs in National Geographic influenced the ways that many Americans thought about and envisioned the Philippines. Although he wrote for other magazines as well, with no other publication did Worcester have as deep or long-lasting of a relationship as he had with National Geographic. In the early years of the 20th century, National Geographic was a respected, influential, and increasingly popular magazine, and it was instrumental in shaping the understandings that many Americans had of other countries. Given its global orientation, the magazine played a critical role in helping American readers learn about the countries and colonies. As a measure of its interest in the Philippines, the magazine published over 40 articles about that particular U.S. colony between 1898 and 1913. Worcester wrote one of the first, and then the final 4 of those articles. Most of his writing and photography in the magazine focused on the non-Christian population of the Philippines. And these are the covers of the 3 last major articles about the Philippines before the start of World War I, okay? In which case there were no more articles about the Philippines that appeared in the magazine for another 20 years or so. So in 1911, he did an article called Field Sports Among the Wildmen of Luzon, Philippine Islands. 1912, Headhunters of Northern Luzon. And if you notice, it's the only article in the magazine. So the entire magazine is given over to that one article of his. And then in November 1913, the non-Christian peoples of the Philippine Islands. And again, the entire issue was given over to Worcester's photographs and Worcester's interpretation of the Philippines. For much of his career as a colonial administrator, Worcester used the non-Christian Filipinos as a foil to urge long-term U.S. control of the Philippines. He argued that the U.S. was needed in order to facilitate a shift from savagery to civilization, and in order to protect the non-Christians from the predations of the Christian majority that Worcester claimed would happen if the U.S. was to withdraw from the islands. The last article, published in 1913, was promoted as having 32 pages of full color photographs, which was still a novelty and undoubtedly drew additional reader interest for this reason alone. Now, National Geographic benefited from the fact that at the same moment that the U.S. asserted itself as a colonial power, A market of magazine readers was emerging that laid the groundwork for the dominance of monthly periodicals as the main source of information about the world. As one media scholar put it, quote, by the turn of the 20th century, magazines were not only a regular form of entertainment, a source of pleasure for a national audience of readers, but a potent and powerful force in shaping the consciousness of millions of Americans, end quote. Part of that shaping included the representations of other nations for American readers, representations that were never neutral. Quote, an implicit cultural hierarchy informed nearly all writing, end quote, on non-Western cultures in American popular magazines. In this hierarchy, of course, the U.S. was always presumed to be at or near the top. At the turn of the 20th century, monthly magazines routinely presented the world outside the U.S. not just as a field for tourism and adventure, but as an imagined stage for American prowess, in the words of one historian. This is a good description of how National Geographic came to depict the world. First published in 1888 as a text-heavy journal, its initial subscribers, members in the magazine's parlance, were primarily tied to academic or scientific institutions. At the outbreak of the First World War, National Geographic was a magazine that appealed to a wide swath of the American middle class, with its membership increasing from just over 1,000 in 1898 to more than 400,000 in 1915. As the historian Tamar Rothenberg put it, National Geographic portrayed the country's imperial agenda in the Philippines and elsewhere, quote, as a positive and natural step in the spread of U.S. enlightened democracy and enterprise, a glorious expression that manifests destiny, end quote. Rothenberg discusses the role that the Philippines played in the development of National Geographic, pointing in particular to what she calls three hallmark episodes in the magazine's early history. The first was the very fact of the takeover by the Philippines by the U.S., an event that prompted the magazine to publish a flurry of 15 articles on the islands between 1898 and 1900, over one-third of all the articles published about the Philippines prior to World War I. The second was the establishment in 1903 of the magazine's policy to publish photographs of bare-breasted women. The third was the publication in 1905 of a number of photographs from a census of the Philippines that was conducted in 1903. Although Rothenberg never mentions him, Worcester was instrumental in all three of these episodes. The June 1898 edition of National Geographic was called the Philippine Number, because all the articles published in that issue were about the Philippines. One of the articles, Notes on Some Primitive Philippine Tribes, was the first Worcester article to appear in the magazine. Illustrated with photographs taken by Frank Burns during the Menage expedition of 1890-1893, Notes on Some Primitive Philippine Tribes is largely a recounting of the two men's experiences while searching for rare or new birds and mammals. Worcester discussed his observations of the Negritos, Manyans, and Tagbanuas minority groups, who he said served as a representative cross-section of the population of the islands. Acknowledging the narrow scope of his article, he nevertheless asserted that his, quote, brief notes concerning the more important of the tribes in question may not be entirely without interest at the present time, an assertion that vastly overstated the numerical significance that he tries to include in the article. So this is the original negative of the group of Manyans on the island of Mindoro, taken in 1891, and then obviously the negative was agreed enough initially in 1898 to be used this way, but it's since degraded over time. In this article, Worcester presented the Philippines as an exotic destination that would prove to be a challenge for whatever country would assume control of the islands after the Spanish. Somewhat coyly, he did not state directly that the U.S. would be the controlling power, though there was little doubt that he believed and hoped that such would be the case. Worcester said that the Negritos, whom he called the most primitive of Philippine peoples, were well-nigh extinct and were destined to disappear from the islands. At the Tagbanuas and Manyans, he said that they would, quote, afford an interesting problem in civilization to the nation whose flag is in the future to float over these islands. In a pattern that he would maintain throughout his career, Worcester paid almost no attention to the fact that the overwhelming majority of the population of the Philippines was Christian and at least partly Hispanicized, despite the fact that Worcester used those identifiers as the criteria for what he believed it meant to be a civilized Filipino. Okay. 5 years after the publication of this article, Worcester was once again a key figure in the second Hallmark episode that Rothenberg points to in the early history of National Geographic. The editorial policy established in 1903 that made photographs of bare-breasted women a routine feature of the magazine. This policy needs to be understood as part of the larger shift towards photography in National Geographic's early years. In 1902, while attending a lecture about the recent eruption of Mount Pelée on the island of Martinique that killed around 30,000 people, Gilbert Grosvenor, the editor of National Geographic, overheard members of the audience complaining that the speaker was not showing any photographs of the eruption's aftermath. Grosvenor said that the moment provided him with a sudden awareness of, quote, the character the Geographic should take, lucid, concise writing, material of general, not academic interest, an abundance of pictures. Quote. In order to convince his colleagues to move in that direction, Grosvenor had to fight against a perception that the half-tone prints, such as this, used by the magazine were vulgar, and that the publishing of photographs of a general interest was beneath the magazine's loftier goals. William J. McGee, who at that time was the vice president of the National Geographic Society, discouraged the excessive use of pictures and anecdote, arguing that, quote, superficial description and the pictorial illustration should be subordinate to the exposition of relations and principles, end quote. McGee wanted to maintain the magazine's status as a serious scientific journal, not a popular magazine for the general edification of the aspiring middle class. Fortunately for Grosvenor, he had the full support of the president of the National Geographic Society, Alexander Graham Bell, who also happened to be his father. Perhaps more importantly, the overwhelmingly positive response by the magazine's readers to the inclusion of photographs was enough to convince Grosvenor of the great value photography the great value photography could have in increasing the circulation of the magazine. Thus, by 1915, the magazine boasted about the primacy of photography in its pages. Quote, the National Geographic magazine has found a new universal language which requires no deep study, one that is understood as well by the jungleer as by the courtier, by the Eskimo as by the wild man from Borneo, by the child in the playroom as by the professor in the college, and by the woman of the household as well as by the hurried businessman. In short, the language of the photograph. Worcester's belief in the teaching value of photographs, the ability for images to tell the truth that he wanted to convey, merged seamlessly with the magazine's belief in photography as a universal language easily understood by everyone. The photograph that is usually credited as establishing the magazine's policy for showing the bare breasts of women was a photograph of two Taganua women harvesting rice, published in the May 1903 issue of the magazine. Now, it needs to be pointed out that this was not the first time that bare breasts were shown in a magazine, but it's the photograph that the magazine itself sort of referred to as the one that established moving forward that this would become the routine feature. Worcester took the photograph of the island of Culion in December 1902 when he was scouting the island for an appropriate site to establish a leper colony. The photograph shows the women standing stiffly in the middle of a rice field, the lower halves of their skirted bodies obscured by ripe stalks of grain. Both women stare down toward the ground, avoiding eye contact with the camera. Save for its role in helping to establish the magazine's policy, it is an unremarkable photograph. The decision to publish photographs of Filipinas with bare breasts was not made lightly. As in his earlier battle to make photographs a more prominent part of his magazine, Grosvenor relied on the support of Bell to push for their inclusion. Quote, I asked his opinion concerning some pictures of Filipino women working in the fields, naked from the waist up. Should we publish them? The women dressed, or perhaps I should say undressed, in this fashion. Therefore, the pictures were a true reflection of the customs of those times and those islands, end quote. Grosvenor went on to say that Bell told him to feel free to print the photographs, agreeing with me that prudery should not influence the decision. That decision would shape the magazine's reputation throughout the 20th century. In the words of anthropologists Catherine Lutz and Jane Collins, quote, nothing defines National Geographic for most older American readers than its naked women. The magazine's nudity forms a central part of the image of the non-West that it purveys, end quote. Now, the third Hallmark episode that Rothenberg writes about, and that Worcester once again played a central role in, was the publication in 1905 of photographs from the first comprehensive survey of the Philippines after the U.S. took control of the islands. The inclusion of those photographs illustrates the close connection that the National Geographic Society had with the federal government in the early 20th century, as well as Worcester's centrality in that relationship. As Grosvenor himself put it, he discovered, quote, gold in my own backyard, end quote, when he discovered that government agencies would lend him plates for illustrations in the magazine. In fact, the Society and the government came together in the census, the director of which was Henry Gannett, a founding member and future president of the National Geographic Society. So this is the first page of the article that appeared that showed the photographs from the census. And those photographs over there are not Worcester photographs. Those are photographs of men that Worcester would deem to be civilized Filipinos. These are governors of some of the provinces who helped oversee the census that was taking place throughout the islands. The relationship between the federal government and the magazine worked out well for both parties. Grosvenor was able to secure photographs from government agencies, and those agencies gained an outlet for their work that went beyond the filing of official reports. Like Worcester and President Teddy Roosevelt, Grosvenor was part of the progressive wing of the Republican Party that advocated a muscular foreign policy. And as Rothenberg writes, Grosvenor's beliefs made themselves felt at National Geographic headquarters. Grosvenor's ideas for the kinds of photographs he wanted in his magazine neatly dovetailed with Worcester's goal of using his photographs to influence public and political opinion about the role of the U.S. in the Philippines. This relationship proved beneficial to both Worcester and Grosvenor. Grosvenor got the images that would attract readers, and Worcester got access to those readers. The heavily illustrated article about the census, published in the April 1905 issue of the magazine, contributed to the rapid rise in the magazine's membership that year. The article contained 32 uninterrupted pages of photographs, more than 100 photographs in all, taken from the census report. The majority of those photographs were taken either by Worcester or by Charles Martin, the official government photographer, with many credited as having come from the collection of Dean C. Worcester. And you can see here, and you can't see, but it says here, collection of Dean C. Worcester, collection of Dean C. Worcester, collection of Dean C. Worcester, and then the photographs are all numbered, and there's a brief descriptive caption of who these people represent, which tribal groups, so to speak. The photographs were arranged on the page in collage fashion, as many as 6 photographs per page, and simple captions identifying the people solely by what culture group they were said to represent. And I just want to briefly point out, I write what they are said to represent because if you cross-reference the captions on the photographs with the captions on the negatives, they don't always match up. So somebody in this will be said to represent, let's say, the Kenyans, and if you go to the negatives, they're actually a Kalinga. That didn't really matter too much because it was just sort of a tribal other, primitive other that he wanted to sort of show up there. So we got quite sloppy how in terms of how we represent. In his book, Displaying Filipinos, Benito Vergara critically examines the use of photography in the 1903 census, which he calls the American colonial state's first major attempt at ordering the colony, casting its net of surveillance over its colonized subjects. Through the census, the United States was able to formulate and officially fix boundaries separating civilized and uncivilized Filipinos. According to the census, there were 8 civilized tribes and 16 uncivilized tribes. The census, noted Vergara, created a sudden plurality of subjects that reinforced a constant theme in American colonial discourse, the incapacity of the Filipinos to govern themselves. In other words, the census presented a picture that there was no such thing as Filipino. There were just tribal groups there. And so thus any sort of call to the Philippines as a nation was rendered kind of incoherent by the language of the census itself. We went on to describe the uses of photography in the census. Quote, the captions of the photographs accompanying the census express representativity, enabling the suppression of context and individuality. The white sheet, seen in all the ones in this middle one and some of the ones over there to the right, the white sheet, the familiar method used by anthropologists and police photographers, covers the background, depriving the photograph of its spatial context, and emphasizes the physical features of the photograph. The photographs and their arrangement on the page were not taken with the intent of illustrating an article in National Geographic. They appeared in the magazine in the same fashion as they appeared in the official census report itself, a cobbling together of images from the Worcester archive. So jumping ahead in time, So those are Rothenberg's three sort of hallmark moments. I'm going to turn now to the last three articles that Worcester wrote. That's sort of the culmination of his efforts for the magazine. When Worcester wrote about Filipinos in his articles, books, and lectures, he routinely framed the discussion of the Philippines around the Kipling-esque idea of the white man's burden to bring civilization to savages. This was seen as early as 1898 and is even more evident in the three articles that he published in the magazine in 1911, 1912, and 1913. Coming after more than a decade of living and working in the Philippines, those articles were a crystallization of Worcester's ideas about the Philippines, about Filipinos, and about the future of the colony. Worcester opened the first of his articles, Field Sports Among the Wild Men of Northern Luzon, by establishing his credentials as a spokesman for the country's colonial policies. Quote, "My acquaintance of the wild men of Northern Luzon began in July 1900, shortly after the arrival of the Second Philippine Commission at Manila. Acknowledging the oft-revised categories of the various non-Christian Filipinos, Worcester told readers, quote, we now know that there are but 7 non-Christian tribes in Northern Luzon, namely the Negritos, the Benga and the Pampa Igorots, the Ilonggos or Ibalos, the Ifugaos, the Bontoc Igorots, the Kalingas, and the Tingians." End quote. As he bolstered his claims of authoritative knowledge gained firsthand through multiple trips into the region, Worcester simultaneously bolstered the legitimacy of U.S. enterprise in the Philippines. He pointed out to readers that the organization of a civilian colonial government in 1901 resulted in his being assigned, quote, the control of all non-Christian tribes, except those of the moral province. It also fell to my lot to draft legislation as might be deemed necessary in the premises, end quote. Thus, both the knowledge of the non-Christian tribes and their welfare depended on Worcester's efforts. He was proud of his results, claiming that because of his efforts, quote, we have been able to cause 120,000 pet hunters to give up pet hunting, end quote. In the final passage of the article, Worcester summarized how he was able to bring the non-Christians toward civilization. Quote, we have been able to get results in dealing with the wild men by following the simple policy of always giving them a security, by not punishing them for a given course of action, unless they had ample previous warning that such action would be followed by punishment, by never failing to punish when, after due warning, they had misbehaved, by making friends with them again whenever they were ready to be friendly, and by finding an outlet for their superabundant animal spirits in rough but innocent field sports. If that course of action sounds much like how a parent would deal with a child, recall that in 1898, Worcester referred to Filipinos as simple children of nature. 13 years later, he evidently still felt much the same way. The first photograph, including the article, is this one here. It seemed to underscore both the childlike nature of the wild men and the tranquility that Worcester said he was able to bring to Northern Luzon. The photograph certainly has little connection to the article's subject matter. It is, however, a well-composed photograph with a greater degree of aesthetic interest than most of the photographs in the Worcester archive. A full-page image, it shows a big-old man standing on a hillside holding a large bouquet of white lilies he had gathered near the Trail of Cervantes. Posed in such a way that he seems to be merged organically from the surrounding landscape, the unnamed man smiles beatifically and gazes up past the camera towards something unseen in the sky. In this article, Worcester portrayed himself as an intrepid explorer who had the temerity to travel to previously unknown regions that not even the Spaniards had explored in the nearly 400 years that they ruled the Philippines. In his own decade of travel, he, quote, familiarized myself with conditions throughout practically all of Northern Luzon, and he included more than 50 photographs showing the Igorots, Ifugaos, and others dancing, engaging in foot races and wrestling, suggesting an almost festival-like atmosphere had taken hold in the region. According to Worcester, these organized sporting events had succeeded in bringing peace to Northern Luzon. And so these are 2 photographs that do appear in the article, but I had access to these scanned negatives, so they're in the display. So these are from the magazine itself. Worcester allowed readers to experience vicariously all that he had actually experienced in his years in the Philippines. After establishing himself as a reliable guide, Worcester invited his readers to imagine themselves on a journey to Northern Luzon. Now quoting from the text. We leave Manila on a Coast Guard boat, and 24 hours later land through the surf at Tabudan. We climb upward through the wonderful tropical forests until at the crest of the Malaya Range we reach the pines and lilies of the temperate zone. We then descend its eastern slope, and as we approach our destination, are met by a great gathering of Igrotes on horseback and on foot, who escort us into town. Worcester structured the entire article as though he and his readers were traveling throughout northern Arizona, and he included a map marked with the different places they visited. In actuality, this journey collapsed multiple trips that he had taken over the years in order to provide the illusion of a seamless tour through the region. Approaching the town of Bontoc, and I'm going to be moving in and out of quote and then to sort of stitch it together. So I'm going to read it and hopefully the flow will make sense to you. Approaching the town of Bontoc, we catch now and then wind-borne musical notes which rise and die away again and again, but gradually grow clearer later. It is 5 a.m. and we are in the saddle and off for Lubuaga, distant 54 miles. Distance that will require 2 days to cover. As we continue our journey, the Lubo men follow behind us and we keep a sharp eye on them. We reach Lubuaga after dark and are escorted into town by Igrotes who have come out in the rain with torches to meet us. As the trip comes to an end, Worcester and his readers descended down from the mountains to the Christian town of Bagabag in Nueva Vizcaya, escorted all the way by Silicon Ifugals with the terror of the Spaniards. Their trip completed, at Bagabag we received an enthusiastic reception. The people of this town are more than grateful because the government has made their lives and property safe. At each stop along his imagined journey, Worcester supplied vivid, sensuous imagery for his readers' benefit. As one critic has noted, Worcester was both the source of and the purveyor of details satisfying his readers' lasting fascination with the human body. Worcester's own fascination extended equally to the bodies of men and women. About a group of dancing Bontoc men, he wrote, "The perfectly developed brown bodies of the dancers are naked, save for handsome blue and scarlet clouds, and an occasional boar's tusk-arm ornament with its horsehair plume. Not a man has an ounce of superfluous flesh. There's a beautiful rippling play of perfect muscle under clear skin. Their steps are springing and panting." End quote. The participants of an Igrote slapping game are described as, quote, "two lithe and muscular young men." At the start of a game of tug-of-war, the, quote, "teams have dropped exactly together, and now how they pull and how their perfectly developed muscles stand out," end quote. Worcester inserted his presence in the article visually as well as textually. Although he doesn't include any photographs in which he appeared himself, one photograph shows a group of Ifugal men gathered around Worcester's camera, several of them clustered under his focusing cloth in order to peer at the scene through the lens. The photograph is captioned "Making the Acquaintance of the Camera." In another photograph, a man from Lubuaga squats in front of the horn of the phonograph, while an American officer crouches behind the phonograph in order to control the machine. It's captioned "Listening to the Talking Machine," and is one of several photographs that Worcester made that shows various men of Lubuaga posing singly or in groups next to the phonograph. Such photographs illustrate Benito Vergara's point about the impact of the introduction of American technology and its apparent capacity to entrance the inferior other, end quote. And they serve as visual signifiers of the modernization brought to the wildland by Worcester. Worcester's next article about non-Christian Filipinos appeared 18 months after inviting his readers to imagine themselves on the journey to Northern Arizona. Titled "Headhunters in Northern Arizona," it sprawled across nearly 100 pages and comprised the entire September 1912 issue of the magazine. Photographs dominate the article. Page follows page with only captions for text. And by contrast, there are just 3 text-only pages, so the overwhelming majority is image. The article served as a showcase for the accumulated images in Worcester's archive. There are traditional ethnographic photographs with the subject posed against a white backdrop, such as these 2 photographs of Ilongo men. Photographs showing people engaged in their daily activities, photographs of the rice terraces called the Ifugals, and photographs emphasizing weaponry. For this article, Worcester blended the voice of a tour guide with the authoritative and dispassionate tone of a bureaucrat reciting the facts to his readers. He explained that he wrote the article in order to, quote, "give a brief account of each of the headhunting tribes," quote, he had become acquainted with during 11 years of infiltration of the zone. The photographs, he told his readers, were taken in part by me and in part under my direction by Mr. Charles Martin, the official photographer of the Philippine government. It should perhaps be said in passing that they are in every case strictly authentic and typical. Worcester reminded readers that the number of the non-Christian tribes in the northern part of the great island of Luzon has been grossly exaggerated, and that there were in reality but 7. Moreover, 6 of those tribes have until recently engaged in headhunting. Although he didn't name the non-headhunting tribe, he may have had the Lepanto Benguet Inroads in mind, as they were the only group from the 1911 article that he did not include in this article. However, he did find a 7th group to include in this article, the people of no man's land, as he termed it, the Tingian, Kalinga, Ifugao, and Bontag Igorot regions met. According to Worcester, the people of this no man's land were, quote, especially loyal, and among them are found some of the most famous headhunting chiefs in northern Luzon, end quote. The first group that Worcester wrote about, in 1912 article, was the Negritos, seen here on the left, whose intelligence he still believed was, quote, of exceptionally low order. Worcester continued to insist that there was little hope that the Negritos could be civilized, noting that efforts to, quote, educate them or materially to better their condition has resulted in complete failure, end quote. Until a 1909 trip to the far north of Luzon, none of the Negritos he had encountered, quote, were headhunters, but there's no doubt the representatives of this tribe, which now inhabit northern Luzon, engaged in this custom, end quote. Having given them the status of headhunter, he had little choice but to discuss them alongside the Igorots, Kalingas, and others. However, while he found much to admire in the bodies of those groups, he was repelled by the Negritos, noting that they were, quote, dwarfish, had skin that was very dark brown or black, and noses that were broad and flat, and arms that were disproportionately long. He also reiterated his belief that they must be regarded as a link which is not now missing, but soon will be. And this is where it gets kind of tricky with these photographs. So, he included 14 photographs of Negritos, including some that dated to 1901, when he first encountered them in Mariaveles across Manila Bay from Manila. This photograph was actually taken in 1901, okay? And this is one of his very favorite photographs. This is him, and this is a man named Ebon. His name is Ebon. And Worcester liked to use this as sort of representativity of American versus Negrito. Never mind that Worcester was 6'4". Never mind that if you see this man alongside other men in his community, he might have had ptosis. He has this swelling of his eyelids that you don't see elsewhere. So he's non-representative if you see him in photographs in his community, but he becomes a sort of archetype of Negrito that Worcester finds out again and again. So in fact, there are more photographs of Negritos from 1901 than there are from 1909. When Worcester first encountered that headhunting. Right, you with me? So although he noted in their captions which photographs were made in Northeast Luzon, he didn't specify that the other photographs weren't made there. In other words, he allowed readers to collapse any distinction that might be made between different groups of Negritos. This way, in this article, all Negritos now are headhunting Negritos. He turned next to the Ilongots, in this photograph here, whom he placed one step above the Negritos in his hierarchy. He had developed an ethno-racial hierarchy that, of course, starts, it's early 20th century thought. So, Anglo-Saxons at the top, and then you can go all the way down to the base, the Negritos at the bottom, and within the Philippines, he created a hierarchical category of all the different non-Christian and Christian groups that he cataloged. He didn't say that the Ilongots were destined to disappear, despite the fact that they were numerically even less important than the Negritos, as he wrote. Worcester criticized the Ilongot houses as, quote, very filthy and scantily furnished, with only the articles strictly necessary to make it possible for rather primitive people to grow rice, yam, and corn, take fish and game, attack their enemies, and defend themselves. Farming implements, hunting instruments, defense instruments, that seems super. About their headhunting, which Worcester said was stopped only very recently, the Ilongots, quote, usually cut off the heads of the victims, sometimes tossing them about and playing with them, and then carrying them for some little distance only to throw them away, end quote. Worcester continued the same pattern of describing and revealing the other subjects of his article, of his articles, alternating between the violence of the men and the erotic potentials of the women, the inherent savagery of the tribe, and the civilizing effects of the Americans. Thus, the dark brown bodies, as he says, the dark brown bodies of Kalingas are, as a rule, kept quite clean and are often beautifully developed. The Ifugaos, quote, like the Kalingas, have until very recently been inveterate headhunters. Their clothing is as somber as that of the Kalingas' body. And Ifugao women wear excessively short skirts wrapped about the body far below the waist and often not extending more than halfway to the knee, and rarely wear upper garments. The Bontoc Igorots are physically a wonderful people, he wrote, who until recently have been inveterate headhunters. Bontoc women wear a narrow skirt reaching from the waist to the knee and open up one side. Upper garments are practically unknown, except in regions where they happen to come in contact with Filipinos. Unquote. The Tingians, although non-Christians, are in other respects quite as highly civilized as their Christian Filipinos. Both men and women have clean, well-developed bodies. In this article, Worcester included more photographs showing evidence of violence and death than he did in any other article for the magazine. There are photographs of human skulls, which you can see. You see the water above the skull, above the pillar of the house. There are 2 or 3 human skulls on top of that. Photographs of human skulls adorning the outsides of houses. A photograph of a dead girl propped up in a chair as part of the ceremony prior to her burial. And a horrific photograph of a headless Ifugao whose half body was bound to a pole and being carried to its grave. Sensitive to the charge that he used the non-Christian Filipinos as representatives of the nation as a whole, Worcester finished his article with a caveat, telling any readers who had stuck with him all the way through that, quote, peculiar and sometimes highly objectionable customs which have prevailed or still prevail among the million of non-Christian inhabitants must not be credited to the Filipinos, the civilized and Christianized inhabitants of the islands, of whom there are some 7 millions, end quote. Even here, though, Worcester misled his readers. Given that the 1903 census put the total number of non-Christians at 650,000, not 1 million, and that the non-hunting Moros accounted for more than 40% of the non-Christian population. Even more important is the likelihood that Worcester's caveat had very little impact on his readers, given the sheer volume of images and text that Worcester devoted to revealing the bodies and customs of the non-Christian tribes of the northern zone. And given that Worcester provided no images and almost no textual information about those 7 million civilized and Christianized Filipinos. Among the people whose attention was grabbed by Worcester's depictions of the headhunters in the northern zone was Edmund Felder, the New York-based film distributor, who wrote Worcester a letter inquiring about movies that he had been told Worcester made by gathering material for National Geographic. Felder wondered if perhaps he could enter into a business arrangement with Worcester, organizing screenings of any such movies for the newly emerging market of film goers. Worcester wrote back and explained to Felder that he did have such films. He also told Felder that he had 2 more articles for the company National Geographic. He said that one of the articles, What Has Been Done for the Non-Christian Tribes of the Philippines Under American Rule, was already in the hands of Grosvenor, and that would probably be appearing in print soon. The last article, which Worcester said he was just ready to transmit, contained descriptions of all the wild tribes of the Philippines, and will be copiously illustrated with colored plates. As it turned out, Grosvenor decided to combine those 2 articles into a single article, The Non-Christian Peoples of the Philippine Islands with an account of what has been done for them under American rule. They comprised the entire November 1913 issue of the magazine, and the magazine's cover promised readers that inside they'd find 32 pages of illustrations in 8 colors. And this group here, the Subanos, these are for the southern Philippines that have not appeared in any of these articles. Aware of the fact that he was revisiting some of the same ground he had already covered in the previous 2 articles, Worcester insisted that the 1913 article remain relevant, in part because he had expanded his coverage to include all the non-Christian tribes, including those of the southern Philippines. Quote, as the convenience of having even brief descriptions of all Philippine non-Christian tribes included in one article seems obvious, I venture here to record some additional facts concerning these peoples and to restate some few of the facts already set forth. Here he came full circle back to his 1898 article in which he wrote, brief note concerning some of the more important of the tribes in question may not be entirely without interest at the present time. By 1913, he was able to provide notes and give facts about a great many more people than equally 15 years later. Worcester's 1913 article is even more heavily illustrated than the 1912 article, with photographs chosen to show typical members of the various culture groups presented to viewers. Once again, viewers are able to read about and gaze at the bodies that Worcester admired, as well as the bodies that Worcester disliked. The use of hand-colored photographs made the clothing and ornamentation of the non-Christian Filipinos all the more striking. Here again were Igorot women wearing almost no clothing, and the shapely bodies of Kalinga men that Worcester was so clearly drawn to. Here again were the assertions that the Negritos might be a missing link and are certainly destined to die out. New were the bodies and costumes of people like the strong, robust Ogobos and the exceedingly timid Vilans, both in Mindanao. The Manyans, the wild people of the mountains of Mindoro, reappeared for the first time since his 1898 article. This photograph, taken in 1891, has been colorized for the 1913 readers. One striking feature of the article was the revelation that Worcester felt some ambivalence toward the changes that he was helping facilitate in the Philippines. Take, for example, this passage about the Bukidnon people of Mindanao. This is a street in Bukidnon village. Quote, "The people are converting their beautiful and naturally rich country into a checkerboard with roads and trails for dividing lines. They're giving up their picturesque native costumes so rapidly that typical garments are even now hard to obtain. A fact which is to be regretted, as the garb of the Filipinos which they're adopting is not more modest or more serviceable and is far less picturesque." The effects of the American occupation can be felt in the North as well. About the Benguet Igorots, he wrote, "The daily wage has risen steadily since the American occupation. An opportunity to work can practically always be had for those who wish it. The people of this tribe have prospered in American rule, and today live in better homes, are better fed, wear better clothes, and enjoy better health than ever before. There's a downside, however." That's the end of the quote. There's a downside, however, and that some of the more picturesque elements of native life are disappearing. The Bontoc Igorots, he wrote, quote, "Upper garments were in the past almost never worn, but are now gradually coming into use as a result of contact with whites and Filipinos, who are teaching these light-hearted and innocent-minded daughters of nature to be ashamed of the beautiful bodies with which the Creator has endowed them." And this photograph is not Igorot, but it's a similar kind of theme going on. It's Patient magazines. It's two different Ifugao young women or girls, and it's called The Effect of a Little Schooling. So the implication is that whereas prior to schooling, hunched, slumped, bare-breasted, with schooling, standing erect, proud, modestly dressed. So he had this sort of ambivalent thing. Worcester's ambivalence is an example of imperialist nostalgia, prompted by the change that he both facilitated and witnessed from year to year on his annual inspection reports. The second part of this article provides a summary of some of the changes in the Philippines since the imposition of American rule, and discussed in much less poetic language the building of roads and trails over mountains and through forests, the construction of schools, and the establishment of an American-style judicial system. Sounding at once optimistic and melancholic, he predicted that it will be but a few years until the Bontoc Igorot is hammering out head axes for the tourists. He finished by giving credit to, quote, "the provincial and sub-provincial officials who, in the face of innumerable and insuperable obstacles, have carried on their country's work with dogged persistence and unfaltering courage, content to do the right thing because it ought to be done," emphasis in version. The overarching theme of all three of the articles about non-Christian Filipinos, published between 1911 and 1913, was Worcester's oft-stated argument that there was no singular national identity in the Philippines, and as a result, that any calls for Philippine independence were incoherent. This was the rationale he consistently presented for why the United States must keep control over the Philippines. Not only was the notion of Philippine national identity an illusion, or so his argument went, but the non-Christian minority groups would also be put at risk if the Christian majority were allowed to assume control over the islands. Thus, it was incumbent on the U.S. to maintain its position of authority in the islands in order to guide the Philippines toward U.S.-style civilization that might result in the country's independence at some future, though far distant point. It is, of course, impossible to say precisely how much direct influence his articles had on the readers of National Geographic, But there are clues that his influence was considerable. The interest in the film industry, a successful lecture series, which was advertised in the back of the magazine, testimony before Congress, and loud denunciations of his photographs both in the Philippines and in the US. Although he had come to the end of his career as a film administrator, Worcester still had very much to say. That, however, is a different story, so I'm going to close by thanking you for your attention and answering any questions that you might have.